In our first story, Behind Mansion Walls,
911. What's the problem there?
lovers on horseback take a deadly ride.
Oh, what are you doing?
She was really all about the money.
She was not going to let this golden goose get away.
And later,
He had started taking birth control pills to try to enhance his breast size.
murder opens a closet full of secrets.
The person on the other end of the phone is telling me that his sister's dying in his arms.
I'm Christopher Mason. The end of a marriage can be a dirty business. With some wealthy people, money comes first, love comes second, and respect for human life, not even a distant third. Faced with losing millions, these husbands and wives chose death before divorce.
What's the problem there?
Stab wound.
Who was stabbed?
Me.
Who stabbed you?
My wife.
Did she do it intentionally?
Yes.
Were you involved in an argument? Sir? Sir?
Those were some of the last words spoken by Dr. Peter Franklin, a man most considered a pillar of his community. But as Peter's life ebbs away on his front lawn, his wife is making her own 911 call. If what she says is true, the night's next casualty will be the good doctor's reputation.
Bainbridge, Ohio. If you make good money in nearby Cleveland, you buy a nice place for your horses out here.
We don't have a lot of murders in this county. We're contiguous to a larger metropolitan area, being Cleveland. Large homes, mansions outside. People have large farms here and more of a bedroom community.
And for many years, if you fell off your horse in these fields, you might go and see Dr. Peter Franklin.
Peter's family was very wealthy.
Take a seat.
And he had quite a large inheritance.
He was raised in New York City in finest of schooling, the kind of guy who appreciated helping other people and being a doctor.
Okay.
When Dr. Franklin isn't at his family practice, he's often out riding with his new wife, Sandra.
Hey, how you doing over this morning?
Peter was divorced. He had a passion for horses, and Sandra was teaching horseback riding lessons.
How about that special present?
And they were both frequent riders. She was 20 years younger than him, and she was a cute, small, attractive person. She always dated very wealthy people, and she glommed onto him right away.
When the two met, it was a thunderstorm. It came together very quickly. It was fast and furious. And within weeks, I believe they were engaged, and in months they were married.
Wealthy doctor, attractive younger wife. A happy life in the country. Nothing strange here. But at Dr. Franklin's office, something a little strange is going on.
I worked for Dr. Franklin for probably 22 years.
In that time, Dr. Franklin built a popular family practice. But in 2003, the atmosphere begins to change.
He dropped out of going to the hospital, didn't go see patients at the hospital. It was all a drug machine over there.
The drug machine is what Dr. Franklin's practice becomes. a cash-only business focused on issuing prescriptions for addictive pain medication. In the medical profession, they call it a script mill.
Can I do you for?
The pain addiction practice was a lot more profitable because basically once you have a patient that's hooked on a narcotic, they need it, and it's very hard to get weaned off of it, and they basically become addicted, and they have to keep coming back and coming back.
Some of Dr. Franklin's patients are addicts, and others are pushers.
You had some people who were there and getting large quantities of these drugs just so they could sell them on the street because they would produce 15, 20, 50 times what they were paying per tablet at the drugstore. So it was an easy way for them to get the drug and then move it on the street.
And when those drugs hit the streets, it starts to draw the attention of law enforcement.
We found in our investigations that a lot of times the drugs that were getting out in the street were all sourcing back to individuals who were getting prescriptions from Dr. Franklin.
According to Dr. Franklin's wife, there's also trouble at home. On August 7th, 2009, she calls 911
I'd like to report a domestic violence incident.
to complain about her husband.
Yes, my husband and I had a fight, and he hit me. I really, really need it documented that he has been violent and that I'm really, really scared of him.
10 days later, she will call again, and this time, it will be a matter of life or death.
My husband attacked me, and I've stabbed him.
And you stabbed him with what?
A knife, a kitchen knife.
When 73-year-old Dr. Peter Franklin meets a perky young equestrian named Sandra, it's love at first sight.
Dr. Franklin can't resist Sandra's youthful beauty, and she enjoys the kind of life his money can bring. A whirlwind romance spins into a lightning-quick waltz down the aisle. But the doctor is not quite the man she thought she married.
He was a difficult person to understand. He was kind of a strange character.
Peter Franklin can be cold and distant. He has trouble understanding people's emotions.
He knew he didn't have appropriate emotions for things. And quite frequently, he didn't display empathy, sympathy, concern. He was just like academic. I mean, imagine any of us being without emotion. That's how he was.
Dr. Franklin is also haunted by a terrible moment in his past.
He and his child and his child's friend went camping.
Feel good? Feel good, okay. You want to go and play? Okay.
And the child was playing with matches near the gas well. When he came upon the scene after hearing the explosion, his child was incinerated nearly. But the other child was just still being burned, and Peter went and took care of the other child. It's hard for most people to comprehend. The guy who's a doctor, the first thing, your natural instincts would be to go after your own child.
Friends of Peter say he was never the same after losing his son.
Enough of it. Just sign the form.
I am not interested in life insurance.
Now he is under
72
pressure
years
and
old.
facing a new
You need
crisis.
it.
It's $20,000. I am not interested.
You are 20 years older than me. I need the security.
His rushed marriage to Sandra has collapsed into fighting and petty arguments.
Their relationship, it fell apart, I believe, rather quickly. They were in the throes of a divorce.
Sandra says the doctor has a wandering eye.
She was accusing the doctor of having an affair with his office employee, a girl that was very young and actually whom they had both kind of thought of as a daughter.
Meanwhile, all those prescriptions for painkillers have caught the attention of the local police. They raid his clinic, and tension between Peter and Sandra reaches breaking point. Then, on a steamy Sunday evening in August, Sandra Franklin calls 911.
Bainbridge 911, what is your emergency?
My husband attacked me, and I stabbed him.
She called and she basically just said, "Hi, I just stabbed my husband."
And you stabbed him with what?
With a knife! With a kitchen knife!
Okay.
He came at me.
Okay.
He hit me.
She was very, very clear to comment several times on that call that she was hit, that he tried to hit her. Those were her words, that he tried to hit her, so she stabbed him.
Sandra says she's in the hallway of their house when her husband begins to attack her.
You're not
You
getting them.
sign over my assets,
You're not getting
or I
anything.
will hurt you!
Ah, what are you doing?
She claims that he came after her with hard, sharp objects.
What are you doing? I was coming in the morning saying
She states that she took a knife and she drove this knife into her husband.
what are you doing?
Dr. Franklin then staggers from the house into the yard. And Sandra makes her desperate 911 call.
My husband attacked me, and I've stabbed him.
But out front, Peter is making his own 911 call.
911, what's the problem there?
Stab wounds.
Who stabbed you?
My wife.
And as Peter's life slowly drains away, he goes on to say more.
Were you involved in an argument?
She won.
Sir?
He said she won.
Sir?
I believe he meant that this had been a long time coming, and she basically finally did him in, and she won.
August 2009. Police in Bainbridge, Ohio, rushed to the home of Sandra and Peter Franklin. In the yard, they find Peter clinging to life.
The knife's come out. Are you bleeding?
Yes.
Stay on the phone with me, okay?
He called 911 first, and he's basically saying, "Send help." I think he knew he was bleeding to death.
Sir? Sir?
Inside, they discover his wife, Sandra, and the 12-inch butcher knife she used to stab him.
She was initially arrested for charges of felonious assault.
All I tried to do was defend myself.
She was taken back to the Bainbridge Police Department.
Did he push you, shove you?
Yeah, he smacked me hard in the face and knocked me to the ground.
Is that when you picked the knife up?
He didn't see it. I picked up the knife, and then he had something sharp, and he went like this, and then he put it up to my throat, and he said, "I'm gonna kill you."
She was not concerned. She didn't seem concerned at all about her husband, about the condition that he was in.
I feared for my life. He said he was gonna kill me right then.
Also seemed much more concerned about her animals, her cell phone.
I'm worried about the horses because Matt just moved into the barn.
As opposed to her husband and how her husband was doing.
I didn't have any intent to do anything more than defend myself. I didn't want to kill him. I hope he's not dead.
It was only after probably about an hour or so later after her arrest that the police department learned that Peter had unfortunately passed. And at that time, they arrested her for murder.
Sandra Franklin wants police to believe that her husband is a violent monster who beat her and threatened her life. Investigators determined that the late doctor is just the opposite. He was a quiet, peaceful man who was terrified of conflict.
From everyone that I interviewed, which I said was probably over 20 people, everyone basically told me the same description of Peter, which was he was very quiet and would not initiate a fight nor even, continue a fight. He was the opposite of that. He was a very gentle person.
And the more they inquire, the more investigators discover that Sandra Franklin may have been the real monster in this marriage.
In everyone that I interviewed, I couldn't find anyone that liked her.
Oh, look at this. Where do you think you're going?
To lunch. It's after 1 o'clock.
Really? Who told you you could go?
They all told me that she was arrogant, paranoid.
May I go to lunch, please?
She was money hungry. She would often be screaming at the employees, firing them.
Enjoy it. He won't have a job for much longer. Go! Get out!
Basically, a very nasty woman was her general demeanor.
Under arrest, Sandra tells anyone who asks that her whirlwind wedding with Peter was all about love. But the evidence found by investigators tells a different story. This marriage is all about money.
She just took over every financial aspect of his life. He had a number of properties that were titled in his name. As soon as they were married, she had them titled all over to herself, telling him that, well, if you were ever sued with malpractice suit, they couldn't get at this because it's in my name.
Go on, get out.
She would come into the office at the end of every day, take all the cash out of the cash box, and go. There was no concern for patients there, and it was all about the money. The money, the money, the money. And she spent it as fast as he made it.
Eventually, Dr. Franklin decides enough is enough. Talk turns to divorce, a fatal mistake.
There was a life insurance policy for the sum of $1 million that Peter didn't want.
Just sign the form.
But Sandra really wanted and pushed for it.
You're 72 years old. You need it.
This was due to expire within 2 weeks. So technically, if he was not killed within 2 weeks, that $1 million life insurance policy would have expired.
She was not going to let this golden goose get away.
I picked up the knife.
Sandra wants the police to believe it was kill or be killed, but the evidence tells a different story.
Let me ask you this. When you made contact with him, was it in the kitchen or down the steps?
I don't want to talk anymore.
In the kitchen area there?
Or I will hurt you!
She said that Peter came after her with this unknown object
Oh, what are you doing?
in the kitchen area near the steps. Well, there was no blood whatsoever there.
What are you trying to kill? You're even more insane.
There were a couple droplets of blood near the laundry room. So our independent investigation showed that Peter had to have been in the laundry room.
This wasn't in self-defense. It was a sneak attack.
And I think that she ambushed him and stabbed him. He had to have taken the laundry and stopped the bleeding because he was a doctor, he would know. And then he went out of the house and got away from her to call 911.
Peter's out in the yard clutching his laundry against his chest, as a doctor would do, trying to compress the wound. He called on his cell phone, and he made his call saying that, I've been stabbed and trying to get help for himself because he didn't believe she was going to come out and help him. This wasn't a loving woman. She hoped he bled to death out there.
She won.
When police arrive, Sandra tells them that Peter had come at her with a shiny instrument.
We had a specialized crime scene unit come and examine the scene. They're experts in crime scene. And they didn't find any weapon whatsoever, as Sandra described, that Peter would have attacked her with anywhere.
At a police interview, Sandra points to superficial wounds as proof of the altercation.
Look at these scratches. This is what I'm talking about.
Wounds that seemed to appear after her arrest.
When she called 911 and the EMS people came to look at her for injuries, they didn't see any injuries on her. After she was in the holding cell alone, and then she was looked at again, she had several scratch marks on her chest, on her arm that we believe were self-induced.
Sandra's scratches are barely skin deep,
Don't you believe me?
in stark contrast to the wound that killed her husband.
She had put a knife 4.5 inches deep in his chest and transected bone. This was not something that was done just to nick him or scare him or try to keep him at bay. This was done to kill him.
And the motive for Peter's murder? Money, pure and simple.
The only one who would actually gain something from Peter's death would be Sandra. She would be the sole heir to the $1 million policy. She was the heir to the property that he had prior to the marriage, as well as the property that they were living on at the time, her country estate.
I don't know if Sandra was capable of loving anyone. She was really all about the money. Everything she did was around money.
Investigators believe that the conversion of Dr. Franklin's practice from respectable clinic to cash-only script mill was also driven by his money-hungry wife.
She was completely behind it. When Sandra got into the operation, she wanted to change it over to a pain management / script mill.
It tends to be a more lucrative business. He no longer accepted insurance. Basically, it was a cash-only type practice that was, again, driven mainly by Sandra.
Sandra only had dollar bills swimming around in her head.
After a 4-day trial, Sandra's claims about her husband's violent ways and her battle to save her life are put to the jury.
I'd like them to know that I loved him, and also that he brought his fate upon himself.
It takes them 2 days to make a decision. Guilty.
She thought we were a bunch of country bumpkins and that she could manipulate the system out here by hiring high-priced legal counsel and the best experts that she could afford. And the one thing you can't buy is the jurors, and you can't buy the facts.
Sandra Franklin is floored by the judgment. For once, she didn't get to bully her way through a situation. And she can't contain her anger.
As the jurors were filing out after convicting her, she yelled, "Shame on you." It was the first time I've heard an outburst like that in the many trials I've been in. And it was just completely out of place.
Dr. Peter Franklin, murdered at age 73, is cremated. His ashes are spread on the grave of his 10-year-old son, tragically killed all those years ago. Today, Sandra Franklin is in the Ohio Reformatory for Women, serving her sentence of 15 years to life for murder.
I always thought that she would divorce him. I guess it was not in my mind to think that she would plunge a 12-inch butcher knife into his chest.
Still to come, behind mansion walls, when a good doctor...
He had the brain, he had the drive, he had a beautiful wife.
...shows his bad side.
Bizarre, mental, aberrational behavior.
You better take cover.
They were in complete panic mode at that moment.
Do something!
July 14th, 2000, I remember it like it was yesterday. I had just started my night shift, and we got a call for a shooting. Because we're so close to July 4th, I remember asking the dispatcher, but we get a lot of fireworks calls at that time of year, so I asked the dispatcher, I said, can you confirm and make sure it's not fireworks? Her response was, no, it's not fireworks. The person on the other end of the phone is telling me his sister's dying in his arms.
Wenham, Massachusetts. By July 2000, Sergeant John Gray had served in the local police department for 4 years. He is about to walk in to his first murder scene.
It was pitch black. It's the middle of the night, not a lot of lighting on the property, and went up on foot to get to the house because I didn't want to be a target. We approached the house, and it's a pretty large mansion. Just people screaming and panicking.
Check out upstairs. How long ago was she shot? A few minutes.
Everyone's screaming at us at once, trying to say, we think he's still in the house. I think he's upstairs. He's got a gun. Mrs. Sharp's brother was holding his sister in his arms. It was obvious to me that she had passed away.
Lying dead on the floor of her own house is 44-year-old Karen Sharp, caring mother of 3, a popular neighbor, and a woman with more than $3 million in assets to her name. A small fortune that cost Karen her life.
The story of Karen Hatfield and Richard Sharp begins in 1972 with a love affair between high school classmates.
He took one look at her, was immediately smitten, and she was a very shy girl, so he started kind of lavishing some attention and asking her out.
Things move fast. Karen gets pregnant. By graduation day, she's a mom. 3 months later, she's Richard's bride.
Karen would spend umpteen hours with the children, playing with them, getting down on the ground with them, reading to them, waking up every morning, making them breakfast, making breakfast for not only them, but also the neighborhood children. It was common knowledge that that was the type of person she was.
While Karen devotes herself to raising her 3 children, her husband becomes a doctor.
Dr. Sharp was very pale. He had very long hair. He kind of looked like a bad version of Mick Jagger, perhaps.
It shouldn't hurt too much. It's a bit like being flicked with a rubber band.
After he got his medical degree, he stated he wanted to cure cancer. That was his long-term ambition, but he decided there was money in skincare.
He was a pretty bright businessman. He bought laser machines for hair removal, and he ended up making millions of dollars from the business side as opposed to from the medical side.
In the year 2000, Richard Sharp claimed he was worth about $5 million, which then was probably, double what it is now.
Hey, let's have a look.
So they were pretty wealthy. They lived in a beautiful mansion in Gloucester, Massachusetts. They had some other places around there. So they lived the good life. He always drove a Porsche.
Hey.
Yeah, thank you.
He knew how to have a good time.
To those on the outside, the Sharps seemed to be living the dream. Until the summer of 2000.
Oh my God.
Who would want to kill Karen Sharp?
Oh my God.
And in the aftermath of her murder, why can't anyone find her husband Richard? Police dig for answers and find out this was no fairy tale marriage.
Dr. Sharp was an abusive boyfriend, became an abusive husband. He was physically abusive, emotionally abusive, and verbally abusive.
They had a terrible marital relationship. There was a story that I think on New Year's party, he completely lost his temper and he stabbed Karen in the face with a fork. And he was incredibly violent. He would drink a lot, and he'd also be self-medicating himself with drugs.
For 27 years, Karen's too afraid to leave her husband.
It was a classic battering situation because Dr. Sharp was a very controlling individual. He was a control freak. She did not have the means or the wherewithal to leave the marriage.
Until her husband hands her a golden key.
Dad's gonna play.
Go play in your room.
Richard, we're gonna play a game.
You can finish later. I need to sign something.
He'd signed over all his property to her because he was scared because he was being sued by a computer company for a patent.
Here?
Yeah.
Dr. Sharp, wanting to outsmart the opposition,
And just down the line.
decided to transfer millions of dollars into Karen's name so that he would be judgment-proof. But when Dr. Sharp transferred all of these assets, these millions of dollars in real estate, into her name, she felt empowered. And now she was able to break the yoke, break the chains of the domestic abuse, and she found her voice and decided she was going to leave Richard Sharp.
Richard Sharp thrives on control and money. Now his wife has them both. And she dares to go one step further. She leaves Richard and begins an affair.
She started seeing the builder who was doing all this building on their new house in Wenham, Massachusetts. He was very, very jealous.
Karen wants a divorce. In a secret affidavit, she details all the reasons why their marriage should be dissolved. And domestic violence is only the tip of the iceberg.
He would do bizarre things. I mean, he did strange things from the beginning, but his bizarreness only escalated as the relationship went on.
Now, Karen's been shot dead. Has she taken her husband's bizarre secrets to her grave? And why can't anyone find him?
People were calling with tips of where he might be, or where he could be. We got all kinds of different information. He could be in the Caribbean by now, or he might be dressed up as a woman.
For 27 years, Karen Sharp was a doctor's wife with a perfect family. Then she was shot dead.
Town of Wenham, it's a pretty small town, so we don't get a lot of murders in this town.
As Officer John Gray looks into the dead eyes of Karen Sharp, he is surrounded by eyewitnesses to her murder.
It's her husband, her ex-husband.
There was no doubt that it was him. By witness accounts, everybody there said it was Dr. Richard Sharp had killed his wife.
On the night of her shooting, Karen had been celebrating her impending divorce with her brother and her friends.
We should. Be good.
Babysitter saw the door open, and she saw a pale-looking man. And Richard Sharp reached back. He pulled out a rifle. He leveled it at her. Severed her spinal column, and she died on the spot.
Police appeal for help to track down Dr. Sharp and receive some startling advice.
You might want to look for a woman matching the description.
Dr. Sharp was a cross-dresser, a transvestite.
He had a fetish, I guess, that he would dress like a woman on different occasions.
Police are told this had been going on throughout Dr. Sharp's marriage. He had even pulled outfits from his wife's underwear drawer. And then,
Richard Sharp was obsessed with his weight, And his daughter, who by that time was 18, was beautiful, had a model's figure, and Richard felt that he looked better in her underwear and clothes than he did in Karen's, so he started dressing in her clothes.
Even his wife's birth control pills weren't safe.
He had started taking estrogen birth control pills to try to enhance his breast size.
In recent years, Karen had worried about the effect on her children.
The young son, on a couple of occasions, would be getting ready to go to school, and Richard would come in drag.
How dare you come in here dressed like that?
And it looked like he'd been out all night, his mascara was running, his hair was all over the place.
Richard, in front of Mikey, get out! How dare you do this in front of him?
And Karen was just horrified by this.
For years, the respected doctor's cross-dressing has been hidden from the public eye. But that's about to change.
Dr. Sharp had checked into this motel in New Hampshire and had used his own credit card. They had the local police there, the state police from Massachusetts. They threw a canister of tear gas into the room, and Dr. Sharp came out without incident.
28 hours after Karen Sharp's murder, Richard Sharp is arrested. Placed on trial for murder, his bizarre sexual behavior could become his best shot at freedom. It's time for the doctor to make his secrets public.
When they read the January issue of Boston Magazine, society matrons almost choke on their afternoon tea. Above a caption that reads, "Sharp-dressed man, is that nice doctor from Gloucester, in a low-cut blouse and fishnet stockings. The door to Dr. Sharp's closet has been flung wide open."
It did come out during the trial that Dr. Sharp was a cross-dresser, a transvestite. The government, we did not present that evidence. That was defense evidence to try to show how crazy Dr. Sharp was.
On trial for first-degree murder, Richard Sharp pleads temporary insanity. His defense team links his cross-dressing to his traumatic childhood.
Sharp was scarred from a very early age by his father. Beat up Richard and his elder brother, but he didn't beat up the sister. So Richard found sanctuary by dressing up in her clothes, because somehow it would, take him to another state of mind where he felt safe and secure that his father wasn't going to beat him up.
In court, Dr. Sharp plays up the insanity defense.
I actually watched the trial, and he was obviously playing to the audience and playing to the jury. And there'd be certain times where he would just sit with his head in his hands, his eyes closed for hours on end. And then he'd suddenly sort of come to life, and you could just see at the trial, it was very, very bizarre.
But the evidence against him poses a difficult question. Just how crazy is this guy?
The prosecution said it was a very carefully laid plan. He knew exactly what he was doing.
Dr. Sharp had pulled into the beginning of the driveway near the street, shut off the lights, and skulked up this 300-foot driveway carrying the rifle.
Oh my God, Richard!
After he shot Karen, he then fled the scene. He knew what he was doing. He realized he had done something bad. He fled to avoid prosecution.
All that suggests Dr. Sharp was calm and collected when he shot his wife. Not legally insane, just cold, controlling, and greedy.
As the prosecutor, I tried to show the jury that this was not a case of insanity. The overwhelming motivation was control. He had had control, complete and thorough control over Karen Sharp for 27 years, and now that was disintegrating. And more importantly, his measure of worth, of self-worth, was by the amount of money that he had. And he lost control of that money.
So I think all these things kind of built up and drove him to murder.
The jury spends 2 days contemplating the tragic tale of Karen and Richard Sharp. They decide that the doctor is guilty of first-degree murder. He receives the mandatory sentence of life without parole. But his life of crime isn't over.
One of his fellow prisoners was about to get parole, and Dr. Sharp wanted this prisoner, once he got out, to take a hit out on the prosecutor, namely me, and murder me.
Remember everything I told you.
And he was going to pay this man tens of thousands of dollars if he was able to take me out.
What's the name of the prosecution?
It was a little disconcerting, but frankly, Dr. Sharp was such an inept criminal that at the end of the day, I did not really feel like I was going to suffer any harm at his hands or someone that he was going to be able to solicit.
Then in 2009, Dr. Richard Sharp plays his final card, hanging himself in his prison cell.
I didn't shed many tears for Dr. Sharp. I thought that he was an evil, abusive, manipulative murderer. And if he wanted to take his own life, that's fine.
This is a guy that had everything. He had the brain, he had the drive, he had a beautiful wife and children. He could have made such a success of his life. And instead, it just ended up in a jail cell with him hanging from the roof.
The children had to witness their mother being killed by their father. He ruined a family, and he ruined a life, and I just think it was a huge tragedy for these children.
Was it for love or money? These marriages were poisoned by greed. Dr. Richard Sharp couldn't bear to share a cent of his great fortune, and Sandra Franklin was terrified her golden goose would escape. Two couples headed to the courts until one partner made a brutal decision. Forget about the alimony. They chose death before divorce. Till next we meet, behind mansion walls, I'm Christopher Mason.